This Torah class is brought to you by TorahAnytime.com.
Okay, Bruchim Haba, welcome everyone. Thank you everyone for coming. This is a topic that I was very hesitant to give. Many years comes Parshas Lecha. I decided against speaking about this topic. It's a very sensitive topic. And even though I chose to speak about it, I'm still very hesitant and uncomfortable speaking about it. And as uncomfortable as I am speaking about it, I'm even more uncomfortable sitting up here on the stage like a fish in a fish tank. So between those two things, this is not one of the most pleasant experiences right now. But Tarahi v'lumara tzarach. Okay, Parshas Lecha. So Avram Avinu, we know, is married many years, and he's not blessed with children. So the pasuk says in Parak Tezayin pasuk Gimel, "Vatikach Sarai eshes Avram es Hagar hamitzris shivchasa." Sarai, the wife of Avram, takes Hagar, her Egyptian maidservant. Mikates eser shanim l'sheves Avram b'eretz Canaan. After 10 years that Avram had already been living in the land of Canaan, Vatitein oisa la'Avram isha loy la'isha, and she gives her to Avraham, her husband, as a wife. So the pasuk is giving us a few clues. First of all, Avram Avinu is married happily for many years, and he's married, of course, to Sarai Imenu. And they live in Padan Aram for many, many decades. They're happily married, they don't have children. They come to Canaan, they're married 10 years. Sarah says, 10 years, we don't have children. She takes the maidservant, she gives the maidservant to Avraham to live with, and immediately this maidservant Hagar becomes pregnant, and she conceives a child, and Yishmael is born. From here, the Gemara in Masechta Yevamos, Daf Samach Dal, derives. Look at number 2. Nasa Isha. And this is a halacha, a very sad halacha. You could say almost a very unfortunate halacha, a pathetic halacha. Nasa Isha. If someone gets married, V'sha Yima Eser Shanim, and you wait 10 years, V'lo Yalda, and unfortunately one does not have children, Einoi Rashoy Levatel, you can't let things be. You cannot continue. So what do? Says Rashi, here are the two options. Ela Yigar Shena, Yisa Acherasima. You have two options. Either you could divorce your wife, or you have to marry someone else. We don't allow you to remain as is. Nowadays, you don't have the option of Yisa Acheras. You can't marry another wife. So there's only one option according to the Mishnah. Okay, Rabbi Glatstein, tonight's Shiur is not halacha l'maisa. And just to understand the halachic underpinnings, but every situation is very sensitive, and this should not be taken as l'maisa. Okay, so that's what the Mishnah says. Mishnah says if one is married for 10 years without children, you cannot remain that way. Says the Gemara continues, look at number 4. Tana Rabbana, Nasa Isha, if someone married a woman, V'sha Yima Eser Shanim, and they stayed together for 10 years, V'lo Yalda, Yoitzi, you must divorce your wife. But V'yiteng Ksuba, you have to give her a Ksuba. You have to give her a Ksuba. Why? But maybe it's because of her lack of fertility. And if it's because of her, then why would you have to give her a Ksuba? Says the Gemara, no. Maybe this union is not zoicha to have children. Not every union is blessed with children. So it's not anybody's fault. But in order to have banim, there has to be a certain zechus, and maybe this union does not have the requisite zechus. Says the Gemara, what's the source for such a thing? Says the Gemara, Afal pi she'ein raya l'davar, zeicher l'davar. Even though we have no explicit proof to this halacha, we do have some kind of hint to it. The pasuk in this week's Parsha that we read, Mikates eser shanim l'sheves Avram b'eretz Canaan. Okay, so this is a remez to the halacha that if you're married for 10 years without a child, Einoi rashoy levatel, yoitzi v'yitein ksuba. Let's speak something out at first. Okay? The Mishnah says that if you're married 10 years, v'lo yolda. But we know, let's talk about the mitzvah pruruvu. What is the mitzvah pruruvu? How many children is one commanded to try to have? Well, it's machlokes Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel. Beis Shammai says 2 boys, and Beis Hillel says 1 boy and 1 girl. Actually, the Yushalmi says, according to Beis Hillel, you have two options: 2 boys or 1 boy and 1 girl. Or, but the Bavli says, according to Beis Hillel, it's 1 boy and 1 girl, and that's how the Shulchan Aruch paskins. The mitzvah of Puravu is 1 boy and 1 girl. After that, there's still a mitzvah of Ula'erev al Tanach Yadecha, that you keep on trying, because, says the Gemara, you never know. You never know. Eze yichshar, oizeh, oishneim ke'echad toivim. You never know. In other words, just like the Gemara says, you teach Talmidim when you're young and when you're old. Maybe your Talmidim when you're old will be better. So too, maybe the children, I remember Victor Miller used to say, someone has a very big family, and then the last kid, he's the gem, or she's the gem. So you never know. Okay, so there are 2 mitzvahs. One is Pru Revu, that's a mitzvah d'oraisa of 1 boy and 1 girl, and then there's a mitzvah of Midivrei Neviim, Ula'erev al Tanach Yadecha. Fine. Now this couple that doesn't have children, says if they go 10 years, V'lo Yolda. What does V'lo Yolda mean? Does V'lo Yolda mean they don't have 1 boy and 1 girl? But let's say she has 1 kid. Let's say a couple has 1 boy, or the couple has 1 girl. They were not yet Mekayim the mitzvah Pru Revu. So do we force them also to get divorced? Or do we say, no, once you had 1 kid, even though you didn't get the mitzvah yet, but at least you brought someone into the world, so now we don't force you to get divorced. Right? You hear the question? The question is when the Mishnah says that if a couple is married 10 years, V'lo Yolda, does V'lo Yolda mean you weren't yet Makayim the mitzvah of Pru Revu, you didn't have a boy and a girl, or does V'lo Yolda mean you didn't have any kid? Or let's say like this, you know, I have relatives, I don't even know, they have either 7 or 8 boys. Beautiful. But they didn't get the mitzvah yet. They don't have 1 boy and 1 girl. So now what? After 10 years, you say, yeah, you had 7, 8 boys, but you didn't do the job yet. So now you got to find someone else. So it's a machlokes rishonim. The Nemukei Yosef brings down that when the Mishnah says that if a couple is married 10 years, V'lo Yolda, that means, one opinion is, they don't have any children, but if they have 1 son, or they have 1 daughter, so then we do not force them to get divorced. Others, however, say no. The Lo Yolda means they were not yet fulfilled the mitzvah Pru Revu. But if you have a couple, and they only have 1 boy, or they only have 1 girl, then we will force them to get divorced, according to some Rishonim. The Ikar opinion, the main opinion is, V'lo Yolda means they don't have any children. Because it's like this. If someone has 1 son or 1 daughter, the Ritva explains, so then we say, you don't have to get remarried. Let's say somebody has 20 boys. Let's say they have 20 boys. They already have a Major League Baseball team, right? So what do we say? Then, right, in Yana Diyama. So then, right, so then what do we say? We say, oh, you have 20 boys, now get married? You'll have 20 more boys. You'll have American League and National League. Right? So it's not going to help to get remarried. But if you don't have any, so then the halacha is, then we tell you to get remarried. Okay? So this is the conclusion that V'lo Yolda means they don't have any children. But if they have even 1 child, then this halacha does not apply. Okay. Now off the bat, it's important to know that if there's any excuse at all that we could explain why they're not blessed with children. For example, look at number 9. If, let's say, the man is sick. Now, sick doesn't mean he's physically ill. Sick could mean there's a condition, a physical condition that explains why he's not having children. Or shachol sahi, or why she's not having children. Or shneim chavushim bebeis asurim, or let's say they're both in jail. And especially today, it's well known that a person's level of stress or the pressures in one's life hamper the fertility. And therefore, if somebody is in a very compromised situation, then we don't force the couple to get divorced. We don't say, well, maybe they don't have the schus to have children. It's not they don't have the schus. There's a physical condition why they're not. And in that case, they remain happily married and we don't interfere at all. It's only if there is no explanation. But if there's any explanation, a physical explanation for why they don't have children, so then they remain together, Shalom al Yisrael, they remain b'shalom. Okay. But now here comes the fun part. Says the Gemara in Yevamos, look back at number 4. Here, Avram Avinu is married for decades in Padan Aram without children. And not once was there ever thought to take Hagar. It's only what? When he comes to Eretz Yisrael. Why does this halacha? Why did they only tell Avraham to marry another wife when he came to Eretz Yisrael? Says the Gemara in Yevamos, look at number 4, the last line. Lilamedcha, to teach you. She'ein yeshivas chutz la'aretz oilaloi min aminyan. That living in chutz la'aretz does not count. In other words, kol zman that Avraham Avinu is in chutz la'aretz, he does not remarry. He doesn't get married to a different woman. Because the years in chutz la'aretz don't count. This halacha only applies if you live in Eretz Yisrael. If you live in Israel, only then do we say, if you're together 10 years without a child, only then do you have to marry someone else. But if you're in chutz la'aretz, those years don't count. Why not? Ready for this? Says Rashi. Miketz Eser Shem, look at number 5. Baal Hagar. V'hai delay nasiv la v'hanach shnei kamoi. The reason why he did not marry her during those first years, ad shaloi ba la'eretz Canaan, before he came to Canaan, shahayu shad merubos b'fadam aram le'lamedcha she'ein yeshivas chutz la'aretz oilaloi. The years out of Israel don't count. You know why? Because here the man says to her, no, we're married 10 years, no kids, we have to get divorced. So you know what she says? The reason we don't have children is because you, mister, are an Avarian. She says, I'm an Avarian? What am I doing? I come to davening on time. I put on tefillin every day. I even come Wednesday night. Why am I an Avarian? She says, because you live in Kew Garden Hills. You live in Brooklyn. You live in Williamsburg. You're an Avarian. What Avera is it to live in Brooklyn? You have to live in Eretz Yisrael. It's a mitzvah in the Torah to live in Eretz Yisrael. You know why you don't have children? Because you're mavatel the mitzvah saseh da'iraisa of living in Eretz Yisrael. So don't blame it on me, she says. It's your own fault. Says Rashi, Dilma mishum avoin chutz la'aretz hemakura. Maybe the reason why they don't have children is because they're not living in Eretz Yisrael. So according to Rashi, if someone is married their whole lifetime without children in chutz la'aretz, you don't get divorced. It's not because the union was not blessed with children. There's a reason they don't have children. Because they're living outside of the land of Israel. Is there a Chumash here? Can I have a Chumash? Yes. Yeah, and you even get to be on the camera, okay? Thank you. Okay. Comes along the Rosh, and the Rosh says, I disagree with Rashi. Here you have a couple. They're married. They don't have children. And the Chachamim say, well, you got to do something about it. You have to try to have children. Try with somebody else. No, I don't have to try with someone else. The reason I don't have children is because I live in Chutz La'aretz. That's such a weak reason. That's such a nebulous reason. That's such a bad svara. That's so weak. You're going to tell this person, oh, don't worry, you don't have to try to have kids. It's because you live in Chutz La'aretz. I mean, that's like just grasping at straws. That's such a soft reason to allow the guy just to remain the way things are. And then says the Rosh, what? It's an Aveira to live in Chutz La'aretz, and it's so severe that's why the guy doesn't have children. There are a lot of people in the Chutz La'aretz that have children, right? There are millions of Jews who live outside of Eretz Yisrael, and they have children. It's not like a rampant plague that people in Chutz La'aretz don't have children. The fertility rates in Israel are not any higher than they are in Chutz La'aretz. So how does it make any sense to say... What? Yeah, so if anything, maybe it's the other way around. So to blame the fact that someone doesn't have children on the fact they're living in Chutz La'aretz, that's such a weak reason. Anyway, we don't even see it to be true. It's not even the case. Ma'asim b'chol yom, there are millions of Jews that live outside of the Holy Land, and Baruch Hashem, they're blessed with children. Plus, the Rosh says, all the Amoraim in the Gemara that discuss, do you have to divorce, you don't have to divorce, They lived in Bavel. If this halacha doesn't apply in Bavel, why were these Amoram wasting their time discussing this issue? What, they're discussing it for other people who live in Eretz Yisrael? Says the Rosh, a davar oyam b'noira. An amazing thing. Something that probably we're not aware of. Says the Rosh, if you live in Chutz La'aretz, 10 years, the same halacha applies. You have 10 years, otherwise you have to try somebody else. So why did Avraham only do this in Eretz Yisrael and not in Chutz La'aretz? Because only Avraham, when he was living in Chutz La'aretz, could blame it on the fact that he's living in Chutz La'aretz. You know why? Because only for Avraham it was a big chait to live in Chutz La'aretz. Because God told him to go to Eretz Yisrael, and he didn't go. We always learned our whole life, Vayomer Hashem el Avram, Lech Lecha, me'artzecha, u'me'olatcha, me'ezavicha l'artzecha, ve'yatzcha l'goy gadol. Right? Ve'avorechecha, ve'agal shmech, ve'yebracha, ve'ra. And then, Vayelech Avram, and Avram went. Says the Rosh, he didn't go. He was nisa'atzel, he was lazy, he didn't go. He didn't go. That's why Avraham didn't get married to another person in Chutz La'aretz. Because he was not listening to Hashem. But the pasuk says, Vayelech Avram, he did go. You ready for this? This is Ayam V'Noira. Unbelievable. You look later on. Does anybody know? Who could tell me? How old was Avraham when he went to Canaan? 75. Avraham ben Chamesh v'Shiurim Shana b'Tzeisai Mecharan. You go to the end of the Parsha by the Bris Ben Abasarim. Does anybody know how old Avraham was by the Bris Ben Abasarim? Well, we know from the Bris Ben Abasarim until Yetzias Mitzrayim was how many years? 430 years. From the birth of Yitzchak until Yetzias Mitzrayim was how many years? 400 years. How many years were there between the Bris Ben Abasarim and the birth of Yitzchak? 30 years. How old was Avraham when Yitzchak was born? Avraham was 100. How old was Avraham then by the Bris Ben Abasarim? 70. So that means Avraham is 70 years old by the Bris Ben Abasarim. Does anybody know where the Bris Ben Abasarim took place? In Eretz Yisrael. Because Hashem said, the land you're lying on, it's yours. So could someone tell me how in the beginning of the Parsha, Avraham is 75 when he goes to Eretz Yisrael, and the end of the Parsha, he's lying there in Eretz Yisrael, and he's 70 years old. I mean, I know Eretz Yisrael makes you youthful, but you can't actually get younger when you move to Eretz Yisrael. So how could Avraham be 75 years old in the beginning of the Parsha, and at the end of the Parsha, he's 70 years old, he's 5 years younger? You ready for this? Says the Rosh. God told him to go, and he went at age 70. He didn't like it, so he came back. And then 5 years later, at 75, finally Avram said, okay, Rebbeinu Shalom, I'll go. Says the Rosh. Okay, that's what the Rosh says. Says the Karban Nesanel, an ois test on the Rosh, didn't make it to the sheet. Where in the Psukim do you see that Avraham went to Eretz Yisrael, didn't like it, came back, waited 5 years, and then went again? Says the Karban Nesanel, it's Meduyak in the Psukim. Listen carefully. Pasuk Dalet in the beginning of the Parsha. Vayelech Avram kasher diber elav Hashem. Vayelech itai loit. Where's Sarah? Next pasuk. Vayikach Avram es Sarah ishtoi v'es loit ben achiv. Hey Avram, you already took loit. You already took him in the pasuk before. Why are you taking him again? Says the Rosh. Says the Karban Nesanel. Avraham came to Eretz Yisrael at age 70. He said, Sarah, you stay behind. I'm just going for business. I'm checking it out. I'll bring light with me. Avraham looks around. The place is nuts. Every single mountain in Eretz Yisrael has Avodah Zarah. We can't stay here. Dude, this is holy land. This is not holy land. He goes back. He said, better than Chutz La'aretz. But Avraham, Hashem told you need to go. So 5 years later, Avraham rethinks the issue and he says, you know what? The Rebbeinu Shalom told me to go. I have to go. So this time he takes Lot and Sarah and he goes for good. Says the Rosh, Avraham did not act properly. He should have gone 5 years earlier, not only with Lot, but with Sarah also. You know why Avraham didn't have to remarry another woman in Chutz La'aretz? Because Avraham had an excuse for not having children. Because he was violating the command of Hashem. But every other person who just stays in Chutz La'aretz, even though it's better to be in Eretz Yisrael, it's not so terrible that if somebody is not blessed with children, we're going to blame it on living in Chutz La'aretz. That is the opinion of the Rosh. That the halacha that after 10 years you move on applies in Eretz Yisrael and in Chutz La'aretz. Avraham Avinu only got remarried in Eretz Yisrael. Avraham is different because Avraham was not fulfilling the command of Hashem. So if I ask you bottom line, according to what we learned so far, someone's married, long time. According to these Rishonim, what would the halacha be in Chutz La'aretz? Rashi would say in Chutz La'aretz, halacha does not apply. The Rosh says in Chutz La'aretz, halacha does apply. It's machlekes Rishonim. Yeah? It's machlekes Rishonim. Comes Aruch HaShulchan, and Aruch HaShulchan wants to know, what's the reason for this whole halacha? We tell the guy, you only have 10 years, and after that, and then, but if the guy is living in Chutz La'aretz, or the guy is sick, or she's sick, or any other excuse in the book, we say, don't worry about it, just stay together. I mean, either it's important for them to try, or it's not important. Why is it that we tell them to try, but we use every excuse in the book to keep them together? Says Aruch HaShulchan, something very important to know. And that is, what's the mitzvah of Puruvu? Okay, we're not going to get involved exactly. What is the mitzvah of Puruvu? It's machlokes between the Minchas Chinuch and the Shagas Aryeh and Rav Moshe Feinstein. And I'll just speak it out quickly, and maybe we have another shiur on it. The opinion of the Shagas Aryeh is the mitzvah is to make the physical effort to try to have a child. According to the Minchas Chinuch, the mitzvah is having the child, being the father and mother of their child. And according to Moshe, the mitzvah is to keep on trying, and once you have them, you're pater. Okay. But whatever the mitzvah is, says Aruch HaShulchan, what kind of halacha is this? That we give you 10 years, and after that, we tell you to try. Says Aruch HaShulchan, you should know that if someone doesn't have children, they're not at fault. There's no Aveira, Chas v'Shalom. Their mitzvah is to try. And if they tried and they didn't have, so they're pater, they're an eines. It's beyond their, there's nothing they could do, nothing you could do about it. Nobody's at fault. It's an eines. Like, let's say a person is in a city and they don't have any lulavim and esroigim. They're not responsible to get a lulav and esrog. They don't exist in this city. What am I supposed to do? In my country, they don't have a lulav and esrog. They're always going to be. So just like any mitzvah, if there's circumstances beyond your control, so it's beyond your control. You don't have to worry about it. You don't have to think about it. You don't have to be upset about it. But nevertheless, says Aruch HaShulchan, when it comes to this mitzvah, it's a very important inyan. It's a very important mitzvah. So Chazal say, look, if it didn't happen, try with somebody else. But it's a very difficult thing to tell a person. It's a very sad thing to tell a person. It's very hard. So therefore, any excuse we could come up with to try to keep them together, we try to come up with an excuse. In other words, because it's so difficult, because in a way it's being very insensitive to them, if there's any excuse in the world, he's sick, she's sick, there's a reason, they live in Chutz La'aretz, so we'll do anything at our disposal to try to keep them together. Now, let's speak out one more thing. Another explanation for this is, wait a second, we're going to tell the guy to divorce his wife. Divorce is it's a terrible thing. It's a terrible thing. It's not, people, somebody once came to, a rabbi once asked somebody, are you married? He said, as of now. Right? As of now? Are you crazy? As of now. Divorce is not a halachic viable option under normal circumstances. The Gemara says, Koshin Gerushin. Gerushin is a very terrible thing. The Gemara says in Sanhedrin, Shehitiru loy leDavid liyachid, v'loy hitiru loy legarish. David HaMelech had 18 wives, and he needed someone to take care of him. So now what's he going to do? He can't marry her. He already has 18 wives. So there are two options. Option is, maybe divorce one of your wives, Here, after all, you have 18 to spare, right? You have another 17 to spare. Or, will be mater and isur d'Rabbanan of yichud, you could be meyached with the woman, right? Avishag. Says the Gemara, the Chachamim told David, will mater the isur d'Rabbanan of yichud, but you cannot divorce your wife. Kashin gerishin, hitiru loy leyached, v'lo hitiru loy legarish. Right? So the Chachamim are very hesitant to allow such a thing. Right? The Rashba asks, well, there's a pasuk in the Torah that talks about gerushin, so why didn't you make a bracha? Yeah, he says it's a mitzvah haba b'avera. It's not a viable option unless there is a specific circumstance. So here, how could we tell this guy? We're going to force the guy? We're going to force the couple to split? So the Shas Chuvas Avnei Nezer says also a frightening thing. It says like this: we know that if someone's brother dies without children, so you're commanded to marry your brother's wife. You're commanded to marry your brother's wife. Wait a second. If your brother had a kid and you married your brother's wife, you'd be chayv kares. And all of a sudden now that he doesn't have a child, now you're commanded to marry her? How does that make sense? Yesterday it was a chiyuv kares, and today it's mutter, today it's a mitzvah. Says Avnei Nezer, you know what the reason is? The reason is that it's so important that a person have some type of continuity in this world, that despite the fact that ordinarily it would be a chiyuv kares, but under these circumstances we waive it. Shelo yimacha shmai, so that he has a continuity. That's the reason for this halacha. That even though gerushin is a very shver thing, is a very difficult thing, and it's a very terrible thing, nevertheless, under these circumstances, the Chazal felt the necessity. So who do we paskin like? Do we paskin like Rashi, or do we paskin like the Rosh? Again, the Rosh says this halacha applies in Eretz Yisrael and in Chutz La'aretz. Rashi says this halacha only applies in Eretz Yisrael. By the way, you should know, Rashi on Chumash agrees to the Rosh, and he's against Rashi on Shas. Because look at number 13. Rashi says like this. Rashi says, why did Avram only get married to another woman in Eretz Yisrael? She'ein yeshivas chutz la'aretz oila lo min haminyan. Why? Lefi shalai nemar loy v'yescha l'goy gadol ad sheba le'eretz Yisrael. You know why Avram didn't get married to someone else in Chutz La'aretz? Because Hashem told him, Lech Lecha, and only then v'yescha l'goy gadol. Which means that Avram was only promised children in Eretz Yisrael. So there'd be no reason for Avraham to marry another woman in Chutz La'aretz, because Hashem told him, you're not having children in Chutz La'aretz anyway. So according to Rashi and Chumash, it's only Avraham that had to wait to get married to another woman in Eretz Yisrael, because Avraham was specifically commanded that when you get to Eretz Yisrael, only then you'll have children. But every other person, according to Rashi and Chumash, every other person in the world, this halacha would apply both in Eretz Yisrael and in Chutz La'aretz. So Rashi on Chumash is a stira to Rashi on Shas. I did not find anyone who asked this question, but I'll let you think about it. Rashi on Chumash seems to be saying it was only Avraham Avinu that was supposed to wait until he got to Eretz Yisrael to get married to another woman. And Rashi on Shas clearly says that anybody in Chutz La'aretz could blame and could hinge and could pin the fact that they don't have children on the Avera, on the Avoin Chutz La'aretz. So how do we paskin? Do we paskin like Rashi, or do we paskin like the Rosh? Do we paskin that someone in Chutz La'aretz also after 10 years? Or do we say no? Do we say only in Eretz Yisrael? Well, the Rambam and Rashi on Chumash all say that applies in Chutz La'aretz also. Says the Hagois Maimoni, but Tosfos' opinion and the Ravan's opinion and the Rav Yah's opinion is that this halacha only applies in Eretz Yisrael. And then says the Hagois Maimoni, there's a svara to say that this halacha no longer applies anymore anywhere. You ready for this? Because the Gemara says in Baba Basra that from the day the Beis HaMikdash was destroyed, really no one should get married anymore and no one should have children. It's a Gemara in Bava Basra. That from the day the Beis HaMikdash was destroyed, we're so sad, we're in such pain, we're in mourning. No one should get married. No one should. So why don't we tell people to do this? People can't abide by it. It's EF Shulakayim. It's not possible. But says the Mordechai, but if someone doesn't have children, good, they're doing the right thing. That's the way it's supposed to be from the time the Beis HaMikdash is destroyed. Wow, that's what the Haggais Maimoni says. That nowadays, since that's the highest level, Elamai, most people can't abide by it. Most people can't keep that. But if somebody is in that circumstance, that's the way it's supposed to be. That's how he paskins. Unbelievable. It's wild. Okay. So now we're going to come to a little lamdas. We said that according to the opinion of Rashi, that if someone is living in Chutz La'aretz and they don't have children, you could say, it's not because they were in Zayche, it's because of the Aveira of living in Chutz La'aretz. So let's discuss for a moment. Bizman Hazeh, we all here live in Kew Garden Hills. Are we doing an Aveira or are we not doing an Aveira? Simply, we're sinners. You have to go to Eretz Yisrael. But there's a famous opinion of Rabbeinu Chaim, one of the Rishonim, brought in Tosfos and Ksubis, Daf Kuf, Yud, Amud Beis. Because what's the halach? Couple are married, and the husband says to the wife, that's it. Let's go now before it's too late. We're going to Eretz Yisrael. She says, no, we're not. My family's here. I like it here. It's comfortable here. Could a husband force his wife to go to Eretz Yisrael? She says, I'm not going anywhere. Says the Gemara, the halacha is, you could force your wife to go to Eretz Yisrael. If she doesn't want to go, she loses the ksuba. You could force her to go. Says Rabbeinu Chaim, by the way, I believe a wife could force her husband as well. Says Rabbeinu Chaim, not anymore, because there's no mitzvah anymore to go to Eretz Yisrael. First of all, says Rabbeinu Chaim, you can't force your wife to go to Israel anymore. Why? It's dangerous. There are bandits on the road. There are terrorists on the road. It's dangerous. There are animals on the road. You cannot force your wife, or a wife cannot force her husband to go to Eretz Yisrael. Says Rabbeinu Chaim further, Bizman Hazeh, there's no mitzvah to live in Eretz Yisrael anymore. Why not? Because there are a lot of mitzvahs hatzluyas ba'aretz. You have Shemitah, you have Trumas, you have Maisros, you have all the mitzvahs hatzluyas ba'aretz. And they're not easy to keep. Plus, in Eretz Yisrael, if you do an Aveira, there's more punishment in Eretz Yisrael. And most people cannot go there and abide by the halachas. And since if you're going to go there, it's going to be a pitfall, halachically, there is no longer a mitzvah to go and live in Eretz Yisrael. Pasuk Rabbeinu Chaim and Tosfos and Ksubos. And by the way, this is, many Rishonim hold like this. Rav Moshe Feinstein writes in a tshuva, halacha l'maisa, they asked him, do you have to move into Eretz Yisrael? He says, don't go. He says, don't go. Why? Because living in Eretz Yisrael is not a mitzvah chiyuvis. It's not like tefillin, you have to put on tefillin. It's a mitzvah kiyumis. That if you're there, you get a mitzvah. Says Rav Moshe, but what about Rabbeinu Chaim? Rabbeinu Chaim says, if you go there, you might be over Averos. Rav Moshe Feinstein, Paskins and Egos, Moshe, don't go. Rav Avadia Yosef disagreed very vehemently. Rav Avadia said, you're mechuyev to go. No excuses. There are no excuses. You gotta go. But Rav Moshe says, Rabbeinu Chaim says, Bizman Hazeh, there's no mitzvah anymore. Right? There are halachic excuses. Let's say you have your Rebbe is in Eretz Yisrael, or you have a Parnasa. Let's say your Rebbe is in Chutz La'aretz, or your Parnasa is in Chutz La'aretz, or for whatever. There are reasons, but under normal circumstances, without Rabbeinu Chaim, this is our excuse. What's our excuse for being here? What's our excuse? Rabbeinu Chaim, Rav Moshe says. Rav Moshe says the excuse for being here is that Even though you say, come on, nowadays it's hard to keep the mitzvahs hatzoyis ba'aretz, they have it down to a science. Trumos, masros, it's a piece of cake. All the hechsherim. Yeah? Well, if that's how you think, then you got to go. Then you got to go. This is our hamlatza. This is our excuse. The excuse of Tosfos is that bizman hazeh, it's very difficult to be mekayim the mitzvahs. Okay. So comes the hafla, and the hafla says an unbelievable chiddush. Let's say Rashi. Rashi says that if somebody lives in Chutz La'aretz for 10 years, we say, you don't have to get divorced. You know why? Because you have an excuse for not having children, because you're doing an Aveira by not moving to Eretz Yisrael. Says the Hafla, wait a second. That excuse was once upon a time when you had a mitzvah to live in Eretz Yisrael. But nowadays, Rabbeinu Chaim says, there's no mitzvah to live in Eretz Yisrael. Mamela, why don't you have children? Don't blame it on the fact that you're doing an Aveira by living in Chutz La'aretz, because Bizman Hazeh, there is no Aveira of living in Chutz La'aretz. Says the Hafla, nowadays, there's no chiluk, Eretz Yisrael, Chutz La'aretz, even in Chutz La'aretz, everyone would agree, at 10 years and that's it. Why? Because you can't use the excuse that you're living in Chutz La'aretz, because Bizman Hazeh, there's no mitzvah to live in Eretz Yisrael anymore. Bizman Hazeh, there's no more mitzvah. You get it? The whole difference between Chutz La'aretz and Eretz Yisrael is that in Chutz La'aretz you have an excuse that you don't have the children. Why? Because you're doing an Aveira of living in Chutz La'aretz. But nowadays, that there's no mitzvah to live in Eretz Yisrael anymore, your excuse is gone. Now, you're left with the card-hold facts that you have 10 years. Says Hafla. Says Hafla, no, not so fast. Not so fast. Ready for this, Lamdas? Says the Hafla. Here you have a guy. He was up all night. He wasn't feeling well. Yeah? He's up the whole night. He finally falls asleep 7 o'clock. And he wakes up 10:30. He misses Man Kriya Shema. So normally, if somebody misses Man Kriya Shema, it's a big problem. It's an Aveira. You can't miss this Man Kriya Shema. You have to make sure to say Shema before this man. Every day, especially Shabbos. But what if somebody has an excuse that he misses Man? He wasn't feeling well and then he fell asleep. So then fine. No problem. Don't worry. It's not your fault. There are extenuating circumstances. Says the Hafla, but what about a guy that never made Zman Kriya Shema one day in his life? He oversleeps every single day. And one day he has an excuse for missing the Zman Kriya Shema. So is he then excused? Says the Hafla, he's not excused. Because even if he wouldn't have had extenuating circumstances, he still wouldn't have said Shema. You can only use an excuse if you would have done the mitzvah without the excuse. If you wouldn't have done it anyway, says the Hafla, here you have a guy, he lives in Kew Garden Hills. Say, sir, what are you living in Kew Garden Hills for? Because Rabbeinu Chaim says in Tosfos and Ksubis that Bizman Hazeh, you don't have to go. He's like, give me a break. That's why you don't live in Eretz Yisrael. You don't live in Eretz Yisrael because you like American pizza better. That's why you live. You like your baseball team. That's why you live in Chutz La'aretz. Says the Hafla, you can't say that, right, here the Rabbeinu Chaim wanted to say, well, Bizman Hazeh, there's no mitzvah to live in Eretz Yisrael, so there's no mitzvah to live in Eretz Yisrael, so I can't use an excuse anymore that I'm doing an Aveira, living in Chutz La'aretz, because there's no... Says Rafla, don't worry. You're still doing an Aveira Bizman Hazeh by living in Chutz. What do you mean? But I don't have to move to Eretz Yisrael Bizman Hazeh. You, sir, you wouldn't have moved to Eretz Yisrael even Bizman Shveis HaMikdash Hayakayim. You wouldn't have moved anyway. Because you like it here. You're comfortable here. They don't have Carlos and Gabby's in Eretz Yisrael. You're comfortable here. You like your car. You like your house. You like your neighborhood. So don't tell me the Rabbeinu Chaim in Ksubis and Kuf Yud, that's not why you're not going to Eretz Yisrael. So therefore, says the Hafla, that Bizman Hazeh, despite the fact there's no mitzvah, in Chutz La'aretz, after 10 years, you don't have to remarry someone else. You know why? Because you're doing an Aveira, you're here, but I don't have to go. You, sir, you wouldn't have gone anyway, you don't have any excuse.
But it's dangerous there.
But that's not why you're not going. You wouldn't go anyway. You wouldn't go even if someone paid for a first-class ticket. Right? I don't mean you. You would go. I mean someone else. Right? Okay. So it comes the night of Yehuda. Okay, listen for this. It's late at night, so if you chop this, it's very geschmack. Says in Rabbi Yehuda, what if somebody married 10 years, no kids, and he says, he lives in Chutz La'aretz, and he says, guess what? We're going to Eretz Yisrael. So we said, Bisman Hazeh, you can't force your wife to go to Eretz Yisrael. Why? Because Rabbeinu Chaim says there's no more mitzvah to go to Eretz Yisrael. But if you're married 10 years and you don't have kids, and then you say, let's go to Eretz Yisrael, miman of shach, miman of shach, you have to get divorced. You know why? Because either there is a mitzvah to live in Eretz Yisrael, or there's no mitzvah to live in Eretz Yisrael, says Rabbi Yehuda. If there's a mitzvah, so you tell her we're going to Eretz Yisrael, and you could force her to go. Elamai, she'll say, no, Rabbeinu Chaim says there's no more mitzvah to live in Eretz Yisrael. Well, if there's no more mitzvah to live in Eretz Yisrael, then you can't excuse the fact that you don't have kids with the excuse that I'm living in Chutz La'aretz, because Bisman Hazeh, there's no more mitzvah to live in Eretz Yisrael, meaning you can't use the Rabbeinu Chaim both ways. In other words, if you have two factors, that you want to go to Eretz Yisrael, and without children, then what? Miman of shach. In other words, if you tell her, I want to go to Eretz Yisrael, what's the wife going to say? There's no more mitzvah? Well, if there's no more mitzvah, then you can't rationalize the fact that there are no kids with the aver of Chutz La'aretz. You know why? Because there's no more mitzvah to live in Eretz Yisrael. There is no aver of Chutz La'aretz. Okay, one more svar and then we'll come to L'maisa. Comes along the Rabbi Yosef Shalom Levi Natan's on the Shalom Eshev, and the Shalom Eshev says that it's not the pshat that if somebody lives in Chutz La'aretz, they're doing an aveira, and therefore if they don't have kids, we could hinge it on that chet. It's not that at all. It's even if you say like Rabbeinu Chaim that there's no mitzvah at all to go to Eretz Yisrael. But what it means is like this. Maybe the reason the couple is not blessed with children is you need the positive zechus of living in Eretz Yisrael. But so long as you're living in Chutz La'aretz, you're affected by the external influences, you're affected by secular society, and it's the tumah of the Eretz Ha'amim, that's what's preventing. So even if you want to say, like Rabbeinu Chaim, that there's no mitzvah bisman hazeh to live in Eretz Yisrael, that still would not remove the excuse of the avoin Chutz La'aretz. Because even if a couple does not have an avera of living in Chutz La'aretz, but still, they don't have the positive merit and the positive influence of being in Eretz Yisrael. So therefore, says the Shalom Eshev, that under all circumstances, if someone lives in Chutz La'aretz, the halacha does not apply. Okay, so let's get to the bottom line. The bottom line is a little bit more sympathetic. And that is the Ramah Paskins in Even Oezer, Siman Kufnan Dalet, Sif Yud. On the second line. V'ayin Le'el, number 18. Siman Aleph, Dibizman Hazeh Ein Noyagin Lachov Klal. Nowadays, we don't mess into anyone's business. We do not force a couple to terminate after 10 years anywhere. Not Chutz La'aretz, not Eretz Yisrael. Because the Ramah in Siman Aleph talks about, the Shulchan Aruch tells you who you should marry, who you shouldn't, who's recommended, who's not recommended. And the Shulchan Aruch says, and we warn very sternly who's the person should marry, who shouldn't. Says the Ramah, nowadays, we don't get involved. We don't get involved. We just don't get involved. For whatever reason. The Ramah doesn't explain why. Whether it's too, it would be too callous, or whether people are not on the madrega for a bezdin to be involved, for whatever reason. Bottom line, halach l'maisa, we do not terminate, it doesn't matter how long. Okay. But fine, so we're not going to force anybody. But what should the person do on their own? What should a person do on their own? Because the fact that the Ramah says, Ein Koifin, doesn't mean that it's the right thing necessarily to stay. What should a person do? Very interesting tshuva in the Pischei Tshuva, Eben Oezer, Sim Kufnan Dalad, Sivkat and Chav Zayin. By the way, I'll just throw out a question for you that I was thinking about. I don't have a good answer to. To bring a raya from Avram Avinu, the Gemara says someone's married 10 years, so what do? Either he has to marry someone else, or he has to, on top of it, or a divorce. Is that what Avram Avinu did? Avram Avinu did not divorce Sarah, and he didn't take another wife either. What does the pasuk say? Vatikach Sarai Eshes Avram as Hagar HaMitzris Miketz Eser Shanim Vatite Noisa. Sarah stuffed Hagar down his throat. And there's no halacha that if a wife is married to a husband after 10 years, she should go find him another shidduch. So Bechlal, the whole makar is a completely different situation than what we're learning out to. Okay, that's very interesting to know. Bottom line, somebody comes to the Shalos HaTshuva's Big Day Kahuna. And Shalos HaTshuva's Big Day Kahuna. And this guy, he was Yirei like him. And he's married for more than 10 years, and he didn't have children. And he doesn't want to divorce his wife, because she's a God-fearing woman. She's a great woman. And she lets him learn. And this guy is very sick. He's ill. He's on a lot of medication. And she takes care of him. And she watches out for him. And the guy says, I know the Ramah is not going to force me to get divorced, but should I on my own? I'm sick. She lets me learn. Plus, she allowed him to raise a yasom in the house. And she took care of the yasom. Says the Pischei Tshuva, 5 reasons why this man does not have to worry, and he doesn't have to think twice, and for him it's the right thing to stay together. Number 1, because many Rishonim hold that this halacha does not apply in Chutz La'aretz. Namely, the Rashi and Shas, and the Ravan, and the Raviyah. Number 2, the halacha is if he's sick, he doesn't have to divorce her, because maybe that's why they don't have children. This man, he's on his medicine, the medicine thing, the Sunday, Monday, Tuesday thing, he has to have 4 of them, because he doesn't have enough. This guy is over-medicated. He's a chayla. Number 3, this guy, when he married his wife, he told her that if he would ever divorce her, he would give her all of his money. Now, here's a very important thing. How much money do you have to give up to be mekayim a mitzvah in the Torah? Well, not to violate a lav, you have to give up all your money. Not to violate an Isser D'Rabbanan, you have to give up all your money. But to be mekayim a mitzvah, only a 5th. Now, what are you going to tell the guy? Get divorced to be mekayim the mitzvah of having children? But then he's going to lose all his money. He's not required to lose more than a 5th of his money to be mekayim the mitzvah of having children. Number 4, who says anyone's going to marry this guy? The guy's an old guy. He's a sick guy. He thinks he should be happy that somebody married him the first time. He's lucky that someone married him the first, who said someone's going to marry him again. And number 5, she's allowing you to raise a child in the house, a yasam. The Gemara says, Kol hamagado yasam b'seich beisai kilu yolada. If you help out, you raise a child, any child, even if it's not your own biological child, it's considered halachically like your child. So for all these reasons, says the Pischei Tshuva, the man does not have to worry. He should stay together and live b'shalom. Okay, so let's just end the shiur with a little bit divrei nechama, a few words. Rav Yaakov Hillel, who's a leading Talmid Chacham today, is a Makubal. He writes, and this is something to bear in mind in any circumstance in life. He brings down a Chazal, and we don't know exactly what these things mean, but he brings down a statement of Chazal that after a person's life, if they weren't blessed with children, maybe they'll be very distressed. But they come up to Shamayim, and God says, what are you upset about? You have something even better, you have something even greater, you have something even more important. You have mitzvahs, you have Torah. Says Rabbi Yaakov Hillel, what's that supposed to mean? What's that supposed to mean? So he says, look, nobody knows the machshavas of Hashem. Nobody knows the cheshbonos of Hashem. It could be that maybe in a different lifetime, in a different Gilgal, this person had 30 kids, 20 kids, a big family, and they came back to this world just for one purpose, to do a certain mitzvah, or to learn a certain thing. And that's what they're here for now. So Rebbeinu Shalom says, look, you're here this time around, you already did what you needed to do beforehand, a different lifetime, whatever that means. And therefore, I'm going to let you get down to business. You'll concentrate on the mitzvahs you need to do without distraction. And la'achar me'ah ve'esrim shana, you will be the same as everybody else. But that's something to bear in mind. Any circumstances. Sometimes people are despondent, that they're limited, they're mitigated by circumstance. Says Rabbi Yaakov Hillel, you should know that in this world, Rebbeinu Shalom knows exactly what a person needs for their shleimus, for their perfection in Olam Haba. And whatever a person is given in this world, that's what they need, and they don't need anything else. Comes the Chavos Havavos. Chavos Havavos says one last thing. Chavos Havavos says, there are two circumstances that a person may find themselves in, ba'olam hazeh. There are two types of circumstances. Some people are in this world with a wife, with children, with family, and other people not. Other people not. Says the Chavos Havavos, either way, the Rebbeinu Shalom has a cheshbon. The Rebbeinu Shalom has a reason. What is it? We don't know exactly. Says the Chavos Havavos, if someone finds themselves alone in this world, they should think that really everybody's alone in this world. Everybody comes down to the world, their neshama is here, but their neshama is a stranger here. With family, without family, the neshama is alone. The neshama has no acquaintances. The neshama is a ger. The neshama is all by itself. And ultimately, says the Chavos Havavos, after 120, in the kever, in the grave, everybody's alone. Everybody's by themselves. It's not like one guy goes into the grave with his poker friends. It's not like one guy, he goes in under 6 feet under and he brings like a chevra with him. No. Every kever is all by itself. So this world is a short world, but ultimately everyone ends up in the same place. And says the Chavos Havavos, if somebody finds themselves in a more lonely situation, they're able to come closer to Hashem. They're able to be mispoided. It says the Chavos Havavos, even the Nevi'im would leave their families, would leave their households, in order to think about the Rebbeinu Shalom. And it says the Chavos Havavos, maybe we don't understand, but there is a certain idea that the Rebbeinu Shalom has given people more of an opportunity, without any distractions, to fulfill certain mitzvahs, ma'asim tovim, without the distractions of a household. But on the other hand, if somebody is blessed with a family, Baruch Hashem, then also it's certainly l'taiva. But it's distracting. Also, trust in Hashem that you'll be able to accomplish what you need to accomplish. But the bottom line is that Kamay Avid Rachmana, Letav Avid, that Darkei Hashem are Nastarim. We don't always understand the ways of Hashem, and the Rebbeinu Shalom should give everybody everything they need. B'karov, V'yaskal Tzedek Me'er Yaminu Amen.
You've just experienced another Torah class brought to you by TorahAnytime.com.